The Reef Therapy Podcast is powered by ICP Analysis. If you'd like to win a free saltwater ICP analysis kit and a freshwater analysis kit, all you have to do is leave a comment down below using the hashtag What's in Your Water. If you're listening to the audio-only version, head on over to YouTube and you can enter in the comment section there. ICP Analysis will test over 50 elements down to parts per trillion. These tests can also be used to see if there's any undesirable elements in your aquarium as well. Register your aquarium on the ICP Analysis app, fill your sample, place it back into the bag, slap on that included postage, and have your results 1 to 3 days after it's received. More at icpanalysis.com. What's up, Reef Builders, and welcome to episode 99 of the Reef Therapy Podcast, powered by ICP Analysis. Today, I've got Salem and our special guest, Allan Vo. Allan is a recent Princeton graduate with an undeniable love for reef keeping, and he hopes to usher in a new era of contemporary and sustainable reef keeping. Allan, you're from the Chicago area, correct?
Yeah, right about there.
Did you grow up in the Chicagoland area?
Yeah, so I was born in uptown Chicago, and then we moved out to the suburbs while I was growing up, and then I've been here ever since.
So what's your local fish stores around there? Because I know most of them. I lived in Chicago for 3 or 4 years. So what was the local fish store you went to?
I've been to a few throughout my time in the hobby. There was one really close to me. That one was called Odd Lot Pet Shop. That one was kind of like my original, first fish store, like kind of 2000s, late 90s vibe, And then when stuff from Australia started coming in, we started going to a different LFS called Aquatica. Are you familiar with that one in Tinley Park?
With Mario, yeah.
Yeah, Mario taught me a lot. I went there when I was really young. Good amount of staff, great encounters there. Then we went out to another place that we've been really loyal to, Aqua Pros, and sadly they just closed their brick and mortar. But I've probably been going there for at least 15 years, man. So pretty much grew up there, and it was kind of heartbreaking going back for the last time.
Yeah, it's tough out there for local fish stores right now, and I've alluded to this and talked about this in past episodes, but these big companies are not making it easy for local fish stores to make any kind of money on dry goods anymore, and it's super unfortunate. But it's the nature of the beast right now. So if you can support your local fish store, go for it. Aquatica is where I had a fish only tank in Chicago, which is always fun because you can get all the crazy things. I had a dogface puffer in there. All puffers have these personalities, and I bought my Emperor Angel from Mario as a juvenile, and I got a chance to watch this thing go just up to that last stage where they metamorphosize into that adult pattern, and it got in between there, and then we moved, and I actually gave it to I turned in all my fish to Blue Line Coral, and they're in Naperville. And they made it the store mascot. They named him Bubba because he got huge.
Oh, sweet.
And unfortunately, they had a heater malfunction and they toasted him. And I hated getting that call. But yeah, it's unfortunate. But yeah, he was beautiful. I got a chance to see him before he passed, and he did make it all the way through. And that dude was a beast. He definitely would have outgrown the tank that he was in. I think I had him in like a 155 or something like that, but really cool. I love the fish that go through all the different color changes. It's so fun to see. And I honestly wish that it would kind of keep that juvenile pattern, because those juvenile emperors and regals and all those little angelfish when they're juveniles are really cool. They got really cool patterns. So
the pattern and the size, that'd be like the most popular fish in the hobby if they didn't change and they stayed small.
I got a baby regal angel from Biota probably 2 years ago now, probably about this big now. But it's really fun misbar coloration on it, and I'm actually getting a trio of joculator angels coming in really soon.
Nice.
So it's going to be the first time in a long time since I've had these guys. So I was able to find some. So I said might as well hit.
That's awesome. Well, before we get started, I want to get an update on everybody's tanks. Let's get into it. Salem, you want to go first tonight? Any issues or projects that you're starting on? Anything you're tinkering with at home?
Yeah, a lot of big stuff in the lab. Getting some corals transshipped to get some fresh wild stuff to play with, so that's fun.
Oh,
Gonna have a
that's
lot of
sweet.
samples to process the next couple weeks here. I'm on my spring break, so nothing but time. And then I've got all my stuff in the quarantine system I got from Reef Stock that's doing well. I've got your little maybe weeping willow going. It's doing great, extending. So I need to probably start some phytocultures and stuff today. I've been lazy and sick and everything else. So behind on the work at home, ahead on the work in the lab, which is what matters. So
Can you tell us anything about, because I saw your status of you trying to get some transship corals directly to your place without being touched or maimed or dipped in anything. Can you tell us what that project is, or is that under wraps?
under wraps, as always. But it's happening. So I got them. I'm excited.
I mean, I could venture to guess what you might be wanting with unmaimed corals, but
it's the last stretch of my research. I'll be able to get hopefully the last of the data I need and maybe a paper. If not, maybe enough data to get a grant and go to grad school and continue it somewhere else and write a paper there. But yeah, it'll be fun. I'm glad to get fresh
Sweet,
corals.
man. That's awesome.
yeah. So if you
Thank
don't
you.
know, I came by the Reef Builder studio, and I brought a larger weeping willow toadstool, sarcophyton, long polyp, and I've featured these on the Reef Builders channel so many times now. And every single time my DMs blow up with, "Hey, you got any frags? Hey, you got any frags of that?" But Salem has a theory, and I'm willing to jump on board this too, about how to get those polyps at the weeping willow length without necessarily having the same exact lineage as Jake's weeping willow. So we're in testing phases right now, but I did want to check, is it open? Because it was getting stung by Galaxia in the
Yeah.
studio.
Yeah, there was a spot that looked kind of sad, but it's already got polyps, growing back on it, so it'll be
Good.
okay. It's like this big, but half of it's really happy. So
Very good. Very
Yeah,
good.
it's a trooper. Come on.
yeah, it's a survivor. It's conditioned now.
It's a sarcophyton. Let's be honest.
Yeah, it's a sarcophyton. I wasn't too worried, but
Allan, how's everything going in your tanks? I know that you've got quite the collection of acros, but how many tanks do you have?
At home right now, I have 6 independent systems going on, but at max, I used to have 8 independent systems. I've kind of like turned back into their fish only state. But everything right now is pretty much running out of 6 different tanks. So I got like an anemone tank, incoming tank, my frag system, and then my 3 display tanks. Yeah.
So you have to have a Chicago Sunburst nem in there somewhere, right?
Oh, I've been supplying them. Don't worry. I've had like an extreme abundance at one point. So I'm like, I don't need them anymore. I just kept 2 at this point. I think at least 6 feet of Chicago Sunburst.
That's
It's like
crazy.
in an entire tub.
So
So I don't remember how many there were, but
what's the secret to getting
definitely.
them to split? Because that's where I'm at right now. I've got this gigantic Chicago Sunburst in a 10-gallon tank that's just like taking up the entire freaking thing, and it will not split. And I know that I could probably, induce it to split with a stress event or feed, and then not feed for a while. Do you have any tricks other than cutting? We're not cutting, guys. We're not cutting.
Oh, you know what the thing is? The crazy thing is, I've gotten all my anemones through natural splits, and they all grow up to about like 1 foot in diameter. And I've kind of realized, especially when they get to that size, the system's phosphates are always in extreme abundance. Definitely when testing, it's like zero point 0.7 ppm. And then usually then the system really can't handle anything but anemones because of all the nematocysts in the water. I've tried keeping SPS and anemones because it's in a tiered system. So I kept anemones on the bottom, and the fresh water would be plumbed through UV through the return to the top where all the SPS were. And even then, I still couldn't keep the SPS mixed with the same water with like the huge biomass of anemones. And it's only when I took out all the anemones and pretty much did a large water change and ran some carbon was when I could keep SPS again, surprisingly.
Man, you could probably have funded your entire Princeton tuition with Chicago sunburst anemones. we get
Oh,
kind
it
of
would have been nice. Yeah.
so any other tank things going on in your world right now? Any challenges you're facing right now or projects that you're working on?
Yeah, so I just came back from a pretty long, I guess, sabbatical. I was in Vietnam for about a month, and during that time, I pretty much let my tank just go on water changes only, and just feeding the fish regularly, just to, kind of test that people's idea of, I'll just feed my fish enough and see how things go. And, you know, historically, that is a, tried and true method in the case where filters are inadequate or the bio load is too extreme for the volume of the system. But in my case, I have extremely dense acro tanks, right? Probably several thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of polyps of acropora growing. And even with the amount of fish in there, you just can't sustain that naturally through the production of the system itself, right? The copepods that produce in there, or whatever phyto that does exist, just won't be able to grow at the pace where it can sustain the system without you supplementing a ton of food in as well. So while I was gone in Vietnam, I just had my dad. He's also a super experienced reefer. His name's Hung. Um, some people might know like the acro named after him, but
Mhm.
he's been doing this for at least 20 something, 30 years at this point. And I just told him, all right, let's try it the old school way. Whereas before I was really going into this really rabbit hole of like probiotic bacteria feeding, kind of fermenting foods for the case of coral in this case. And I noticed a drastic decline in the 1 month gap where I didn't feed my concoction. Um, what I hypothesize is that due to the acceleration of growth that I had several months during my feeding, that sudden deceleration and removal of the input of the constant daily feeding that I was doing caused a rapid shock to the dynamics of the system, right? So if you're imagine like you're stepping on the gas in a car, right, and you're hitting like 100. In the example of the car, there's drag stuff. You can just slow down, you can kind of coast, and eventually you'll be fine. But in a living, ecosystem, this analogy doesn't really, apply one to one. Once you take off the gas, the thing is, those animals that you're growing at that rate are either going to halt completely or just die because of the biomass that they've accumulated and the resources that their basal requirements to keep going. If you just remove that completely, obviously you're going to start seeing malnourishment decline back to, the carrying capacity of the system. And pretty much that's what I've kind of noticed where I've resumed the feeding. The growth has resumed back to the rate where I had previously, and the coloration and the tissue, pretty much of all the acroporas, LPS, pretty much NPS in general. In general, all corals have improved, and all the maladies have kind of subsided since I've started feeding again.
See, I just always thought the corals knew that you went on vacation, and that's when they started
Oh,
to die.
100%, 100%. Let me tell you, in 2017, I was about to go to California. I was about to go cherry pick some corals from Two Guys Coral, and you know what happened? On the minute we got into our car, my neighbor dug into his backyard and blew the street's transformer.
Oh no.
So we called the electric company. They said, "All right, it's gonna be 3 hours, no big worry." I'm like, "All right, I'll be in California. I'll be back in a day or two. I'll be fine." Nope. Their 3 hour promise turned into like a 1.5 day ordeal. And then in that time, I was in California. My house had no power for, I don't know, probably at least 50 hours. And oh my God, can you imagine the smell when you come home to six full blown SPS tanks? Just,
Ugh,
oh my God.
I can
that's
smell it right now.
terrible. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
oh
It's like
man.
low tide and slime.
That's one of those
Oh,
times where you feel like, should I keep going? Like having those
oh,
types of losses, that's hard.
yeah. It was like going to the fish market, like 10 days after they were supposed to close. It was pretty bad, but at that time, yeah, I was really thinking about shutting everything down, but I stuck through it, and it got me to school and it got me out of it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you touched on the probiotic concoction that I want to talk about. We'll get to that in a second. Just wanted to give a quick update on my stuff downstairs. The Red Sea cruising right along. Salem is coming into town, so I got to make sure everything's clean because he's
You better
staying at my
scrape your
house.
glass.
We've got a frag swap. Our biannual frag swap is coming up, and he's going to be selling some coral in there, and staying here. We're going to go do some tank tours and see some cool systems around the area. So I'm excited about that. I did, that I got that Ghani from Reef Stock that I forget what it's called. Something silly. Grandmaster Ghani.
Ooh.
And it's doing awesome. I'm so excited. I've never been able to. I've never been a Ghani guy, but look, here I go.
It's your first Ghani?
Well, I've had Ghanis in the past that just haven't really done super well. But I don't know what it is about the Red Sea. It's a fresh tank, so we're talking like 6 months old at this point.
Interesting note about Ghanis, and everyone's, in my experience, has really harped about manganese and the importance of manganese in the terms of health for Ghanis. But through all my ICPs, I've pretty much tested near zero at manganese, and I've had growing large colonies of Ghana without any issue, and just relying on the particulate food. So I'm pretty sure, the invention of like Ghani food in general was the issue of like overfiltration and like home aquarium water.
Interesting.
Back to my point at the recap.
Oh yeah.
What did I have to say about manganese?
Manganese. Somebody said it somewhere at one time, and now everybody's like, "Oh, Ghani's
to sell
a
product."
Yeah.
Yep.
I'll have to watch what you said, man.
I think it's nutrition as well. I completely agree. I was like, the manganese question is overblown. I'm sure it could help, but that not any more than any other trace element. If you get your traces in line, you're going to see benefits writ large. But yeah.
One of my biggest things when I'm selecting a coral, especially at a swap, is I'll grill whoever is selling it to see how long they've had it.
If they know it.
If they know it, have they fragged it before? How well is it done when they fragged it? And this is Dwayne Wade of Wade's Aquatics. I think he's out of North Carolina. Dwayne Ward. Yeah. He's out of North Carolina and just an awesome dude. But he had a whole section of his frag rack was, I don't know, there's probably like 15 or 20 of these frags.
Yeah. There was like 30, I think, at least.
And I was like, okay, there's plenty. I'm just going to grab it right before I leave for the airport. So, it's just in the water for a little bit of time and we don't have to worry about too much temperature drop. And I went back over there. I don't know if it was Tyler or maybe Salem that said, hey, man, he's got like 2 left because Joe Caparata just came over and bought like 9. So I ended up getting one because they all looked really good and he's been growing them like crazy. So that's usually a good sign for me that it's safe to purchase. There's so many, and we've talked about these like turn and burn shops online where they get them in from the ocean and then they just, here's a $50 amazing maricultured looking acro and it's just super colorful and then it's just gone in a heartbeat the next day.
Yeah.
But I really do some due diligence on the aquaculture coral side of things to make sure that it does well in the hobby, because we've talked about that so many times. Like all these corals that have been in the hobby for forever are not necessarily immune, but they've seen all of these pathogens that are so used to the aquarium water. You know what I mean? So if you can get something that's more equipped to handle those pathogens, fantastic. So it's doing great. So I'm pretty excited about that because it's awesome and colorful. I got a stylo as well, just because I'm trying to throw some FPS in there and see and just test, and everything's doing really well so far. So it's been a funny tank for me, but I'm hoping that Salem, you can come over and give me a little consultation since I'm offering you that.
There's been some funny problems for sure.
Yeah. But maybe you'll come over and be like, it's the crab that you got in. That's what it is.
The single feather duster in the back right corner. This is causing the issues.
Yeah. I do want to send off another aquabiomics test because I sent one off for the baseline and that came back with that pathogen that we've talked about before, Aqua rickettsia. And also uranema came back on the fish DNA, the eDNA test, which is it's such valuable information. And now that I've passed ick and I've passed all those things, probably still in the tank, I want to see how the UV affected everything when I ran that for about a month and a half. It's still in the system. It's still running water through it. The bulb is not on, because I noticed again, when you've got a new tank, it's like there's so much up and down stuff happening, and I just turned it off and everything just kind of popped back to life. So I'll take that for now. But I got to send another one in just to see where I'm at now and see if any of that stuff has been eradicated or if it's maybe doing better than I want it to. I don't know. We'll see. But yeah,
I bet
I'm
your
gonna do that.
Pelagibacteriaceae is going to be eradicated.
I'm hoping that just the since the UV's been off for a couple months now, that maybe it's proliferated a little bit
Could have
more.
came back.
Yeah.
How's your UV plumbed? Is it through the return line, or is it kind of
No,
in
it's
addition to it?
it's it's on its own pump. So
Got it, got
I
it.
did it as kind of a triage because I had purple tang with ick. And that's how I
It
introduced ick to my
happens.
system. Yeah. But it was still
Yeah.
eating fine. And then all the fish got it except for my basslet, my golden assessor basslet. And then I ran the UV, was feeding heavy, Celcon, Vitachem, all the things. And it kind of went away. Immune systems prevailed, which is fantastic. I know it's still in the system. It'll be interesting to see how prevalent it is on the aquabiomics test, because it was not on the initial one. So it definitely was that purple tang that brought it in. So
We got to
uh,
set you up a quarantine system when I'm there.
please, yes, let's do it. We can make a video. I got plenty of random tanks laying around. That's for sure. Empty tanks. And then we've got this fun thing. I wasn't sure if I should wait until the end of the podcast to say this, but we're going to be doing our own March Madness brackets, and we're going to call it Reef Royale. That is Salem's idea, and it's just going to be Zoas. I know Zoas have crazy names, and it's going to be bonkers, but at the same time, like there's so much beauty in these little softies, So I've been working on the bracket for the past, I don't know, day or two. I've been like manually filling everything in on Photoshop because I had to find a template and I made a logo and everything. So, but at the end of this, and if you're listening to this podcast now, you're privy to this because I don't know if we've done a whole lot of pre-promotion for this, but
We have done
$1,000
nothing. We have done zero promotion.
$1,000 to zoanthids.com is for the winner, and you don't have to pick the right Zoa to win. It's a participation award. So if you want to sign
Oh,
up,
sweet.
yeah, it's pretty cool. And you can get some pretty decent, like Brandon's got some awesome stuff at zoanthids.com. So all right, we're going to get to the main subject matter of this podcast, and that is this probiotic concoction that Allan, you've come up with. Kind of take us through the inception of this. I know you've done a full length video on this. You've talked about every little detail of this, but just for our audience, kind of take us through its inception, what's in it, and your thought process behind it.
All right. So, I mean, I've always been really inspired by a lot of the things I've seen online, especially growing up as a kid, with the early internet and stuff like Reef Central, the online forums, trying to emulate those people's success in your own aquarium was something that I always kind of strived for. And not having like a direct mentor in the hobby just kind of made me experiment and tinker on my own. So over the years, just reading a lot of the literature, science on, how corals act and react in nature and in captivity, you just kind of learn and pick up on things over time. And through the experience that you gain in your own hobby, you just kind of like develop this sixth sense in terms of like growing coral. And, I think a few years back, I think Sunny X became very prevalent in terms of his bacteria driven method, right? And in his, I guess like a simple explanation of how he runs his system is that he carbon doses and he doses probiotic bacteria in some way. And just to see the results and growth that he got within a 1 year time span, it was, quite phenomenal. You start as like small mini colonies, and by the end of year one, you have a full reef tank. And I always thought like, man, I really gotta be missing something or am overcomplicating things with the amount of time, money, effort, and just products that I put into my tank, whereas this guy is literally putting in three ingredients, right? And so I got thinking and started trying to tackle my issues through like a holistic lens versus, these band-aid solutions where like I have algae, throwing fluconazole, I got red slime, throwing chemically and stuff like that. I started thinking in, a different way and starting to tackle my issues, starting more from the base and attacking the microbiome and preventative actions, right? So by taking these preventative actions, you pretty much prevent any maladies that will further ensue. And from there, I started looking at my reef tanks and catering to the things that I grow. Right now, it's SPS, right? And I thought, I spent so much money on these particulate feeds and I never see the actors actually eat them. I probably got like a pound of like those particle foods, but just like from a bunch of different brands just sitting around my house. And I'm like, what am I going to do with this stuff? Like scatter it in my garden or something for like fertilizer. So I started thinking like I gotta, at least get my money's worth out of this and, started getting I started going down the rabbit hole of these biological processes and wastewater treatment, large scale commercial aquaculture, like tilapia, shrimp farming, and looking at these methods and how we could apply them directly in like a reef setting, because a lot of these things, a lot of the information is out there for us hobbyists, but the thing is, it's hidden, it's buried under a different name, a different term that's not widely used in literature. And as a result, it's hidden from us and we can't find it and we give up, right? But if we keep on digging and we keep on flipping the pages, we'll find something that we can use eventually. And that ultimately resulted in this concoction where I attempted to tackle everything all at once, essentially, right? By pretty much dosing a bioremediating product into the system that not one acts as a live feed and two cleans the water, improves the microbiology of the system as well. And as a result, I've gotten really good like coloration and growth, especially from SPS corals. And at this point, I've had at least about a dozen people that report back to me saying the same, overall trends happening. So my idea initially was I was going to really just go balls deep, into my system and experiment, kind of risk everything. And then from there, kind of build on through, these community anecdotes and refine the formula so that, it's not this super bloated recipe and essentially boil it down to a few things that most reefers probably already have in their pantry, you know. So what this original concept was is, I have so much stuff that I've accumulated over the years. How can I use it all in a way that is functional and is going to lead to positive results in the end? And I've been doing this for about a year now, and it's been through a lot of iterations. You can see through my Instagram or my Reef to Reef the amount of research that I've put in and the iterations of the formula. First, starting it off as like this container that you kind of let marinate, and then to potentially this multi-day culture that you finish eventually.
So how is it dosed? Are you tossing this in just like through a syringe, or is it on a doser? Does it have to be refrigerated? How does that typically go in the tank?
So the like raw ingredients that I use have to be stored properly, right? Like the bacteria strains, like the zeovit, that type of stuff obviously has to be refrigerated to maximize their lifespan. And in terms of the other raw ingredients, you also have to work to like minimize any potential cross contamination. So you don't want to use the same spoon to pick up this particular product and then use the same spoon for something else. So I keep everything separate, clean in its own pantry. And then upon mixing everything, it's kind of like think about it as making like a dough, right? Making some bread, dry ingredients and your wet ingredients that you mix, you kind of let it sit, you let it proof, and then it's ready for your tank. Um, Essentially, that's the first iteration of what I made. What I started doing was kind of reading through the vague slogans and jargon that a lot of these companies have on their products and try and reverse engineer what was crucial um, for the whole concoction. And it kind of boiled down to a few things like you need a particulate food source, your initial enzymes that get going, your bacteria, yeah, carbon source, and then your trace elements. In this case, it's like fresh salt water, right? If you have a freshly mixed batch of salt water, it should have all the required traces in there to get a reef going. So that's what I use. And then from there, it goes through a sterilization process. Either I'll boil the RODI before mixing in it into the dry ingredients, and then, or in addition to adding the bacteria in, I'll microwave the mixture for about 2 minutes. That's what Mike Paletta had told me, and I've been doing that ever since. So it might be helpful, it might not be, but it's a small inconvenience, you know. So it's not a big deal. And from there, I either aerate it for 8 hours and then dose it, or I'll uh, aerate, dose as needed, and then refrigerate, and then pull it out, shake it, and then dose as needed, refrigerate. And that's how the process is at the moment.
So before Salem gets into biology questions and things, what's the typical cost of like one batch of this, if you had to guess? Because I know that there's a lot of KZ products in here. There's a lot of, there's a decent amount of expensive things in this
Right, right.
concoction.
It's essentially it could be, I guess you could have multiple price ranges or different versions of the concoction, right? Um, it, Depending on what bacterial source and what raw ingredients you'll use, that's what is going to mainly factor in to the raw cost or the final cost of what you make. So let's say someone that is using Microbacter 7 is going to have a much cheaper end cost than someone that's using the Zeobac. And I'm not sure on the efficacy of whether which brand is more superior than the other one, but you can see where the 5x increase in price is going to end up. But in theory, it should be a overall cheaper method. I haven't done the exact math yet, but from all the literature I've read, this usage of probiotic bacteria has led to a greater feed conversion rate, meaning you can feed less and grow more, right? The animals have a better utilization of feed input going into the system. So in this case, it could be, in our scenario, it could be that by using the concoction, we might be spending a little bit more upfront in terms of cost and materials, but the growth and the, let's say, quality of life that we get back from it is going to outweigh whatever initial cost that we put in.
So with the Paletta thing, so you either micro or boil or microwave the RODI water and then mix the salt, or what was the second thing? I didn't quite hear you there.
Okay, so I'll mix all the raw food, right? Like the dry powders, the salt, that will go into a mixing container separately, and then I'll boil the RODI or microwave it, whatever is more accessible at that point. Um, Once it's heated to boiling point, hold it at there for about 5 to 10 minutes. From there, I'll let it cool down. And then once the temperature is around 100 degrees, I'll add in the water, let that simmer for a little bit, and then around about 90 degrees or sometimes at 100 degrees, I'll put in the bacteria strains. Because most of the literature that I've read, and most of my assumptions are going to say that the bacteria products that we're putting in are mostly bacillus strains like Bacillus subtilis, Cumulus, Plantiformum, or something like that. And they're optimized at around 197 degrees Fahrenheit apply. From there, I close off the container. I have an airtight jar, and from there I give it a shake, and I just let it rest, and it goes on from there. And then I come back at the end of the day, I portion out what I need, and then I dose it.
Okay, so that So that doesn't involve like because you mentioned how you have aeration to culture it. So this is a
Right. This is
non-aeration like way. This is just like
yeah,
a
yeah.
sterilize,
This
add
is
in the bacterial
mhm.
components, they wake up, and then you have them.
Yeah. This was the first like iteration, right? And the aeration part was a potential add-on that I thought, hey, maybe I can do this, indefinitely or at a relatively cheap cost once I get my culture going. Because if you think about it like that way, you would spend like $20, right? And you would have like this infinite food source as long as you throw like Reef Royals or whatever into this pot. You know what I mean? It's kind of like sourdough starters, right?
So yeah, the
In that sense,
initial process is always sterilize, wake it up, and then sometimes you can take one of those subcultures, so to speak, and then you will continue to culture it after that. And then that's when you add
right.
in the particulates, basically.
And then, yeah, I had watched your Reef recap addressing some of the potential contamination possibilities that, dawned on me that I didn't really reflect on that in my video. I probably should have made that a bit more clear. But, each step is very crucial that, you don't blow anything in there, nothing drops or falls off your face. I wear like a hairnet, like an N95, gloves, everything like that, just to make sure that nothing just like falls off of me by accident too. And in terms of prolonged culture, it's relatively infeasible. Um, in the terms of these biofloc formulations that people use for shrimp farming, it takes several weeks to get like a very sustainable culture going. And at that point, once there's like a critical mass of probiotic bacteria, they pretty much outcompete whatever lands in there, or it keeps it at a very, therapeutic rate where it's not an issue at all. So in terms of that, that's where I see the benefits once I add it into my tank. So coming back from this 1 month kind of sabbatical, I had a cyano outbreak due to the imbalances once I stopped dosing. And since then, it's been about a month since I've been back. The cyano has pretty much receded out to the point where it's very faint and it's not as thick and dark and vibrant as it was before. It's much more patchy and dull. So this was a pretty cool experiment to see because prior to me dosing this routinely, I would have cyano outbreaks here and there on different systems, more related to the seasonal changes. And since I started it, the systems that I routinely dose it to never never had any of these weird like bacterial flare-ups, whereas my untreated anemone tank would just continually have cyano, even though it receives the same weekly 10% water change, the filtration is relatively the same, bioload is the same, you know. So something that lands in the air or is transmitted by the air can't really take hold in the other systems that I routinely dose this into.
It's the oak trees.
Yeah, Chris
Probably,
Beckley.
man.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's his favorite rant.
It's it's gotten to the point where I've installed like HEPA filters in all my fish rooms just to suck up the amount of dust or whatever that could be floating around in the air. And I mean, not only is it good for, let's say the fish tank, if that's what you're getting it for, it's, pretty good for you too. You don't want to be breathing in all that dust because, like after you clean it after like a few months, it's pretty nasty. And, one thing I hated about living in dorms were just realizing how super dusty they were and how poor the ventilation was. It's, definitely not the best for your lungs.
So my question is, okay, so you've got PPE on, you're wearing the stuff. So as far as safety for the other members of my household, I know a lot of reef keepers have families and kids and things like that. Is this in any way like dangerous to be concocting in your kitchen?
I mean, given that you take all the proper preparation goes into it, it should be fine. And as long as you're not already dosing a contaminated culture, that should also be fine through like the probiotic theory. But then again, there's always potential in this, and I definitely wouldn't want to have anyone like go through that risk. I would say if you really want to like try and get like the maximal benefits out of this, you would have to weigh out the holistic pros and cons of doing this and your specific household and use case. In my case, all my fish rooms are well ventilated. I can isolate them. Like I said, I have the air filtration going through. And, most of the people that are in very close and direct contact with the tanks and this stuff is with me or my father, and we're completely fine with it. My mother's fine with it. So for my use case, it's fine. Me personally, I haven't had any issues, but I could definitely see, let's say, like an immunocompromised person could potentially have issues if they were to pursue this method. So I wouldn't tell you to go out there and do this. I recommend you to sit down. Just don't obviously just follow me blindly because you don't know me. You don't know my character. You might have just heard or something or read something about me, and actually dig into the literature and the use cases of these techniques and how they are used at an industrial scale, and if you can use it or have the ability to use it in your household.
Like, so you've advocated a couple different strains, so like Microbacter 7, or there's the Zeobac stuff, there's the addition of Zeozyme. So my question is, why these particular strains of bacteria over culturing something in pure culture that is coral associated like Rhodomonas? So, that's bacterial plankton that we could culture in a controlled setting. I understand the economic perspective of wanting to use up old foods and goods that you don't want to go to waste, but also in terms of, these are terrestrial strains, lactobacillus, bacillus subtilis, things like that. Maybe they could be heterotrophically uptaken, but I guess I suppose if we're thinking about this in terms of like literature, there's a lot more literature out there about Rhodosudomonas being uptaken as a coral symbiont. So I mean, why not doing something like that and then having live phytoplankton and having both the fatty acids and the protein from both of those, and then carbon dosing on top of it? Would that not have the same kind of end result as a holistic method compared to this?
Right. To address your concerns, in the past, I have pretty much done pretty much everything you have said except culturing my own bacteria or bacterial plankton. I've dosed phytoplankton. I've grown phytoplankton cultures, rotifers, copepods, routinely dosed it, but I've just not gotten this immediate. This, in terms of immediate, I mean within like a 3 week lag time. In terms of SPS, it's relatively immediate, right? And within 3 weeks, it's about 95% of Acropora display a increased rate of growth. All their axial correlates are growing, and another thing that I've noticed is the immediate release of their mesenterial filaments into the water. Perhaps this could be due to like the decomposition of the foods that I've been putting in, and that releases a chemical signal for the acros to feed, right? Or it could be the overabundance of bacteria. So it's either one of those. I haven't gotten down to testing whether it's a combination of both or specifically one or the other. And then in terms of why I use these specific products, it's because just through pure anecdotes and what is available in commercially, right? The common hobbyist doesn't have the proper setup to culture bacteria in a sterile, lab environment consistently, right? You might get one good culture, say it's great, mess up the next culture, screw up your entire tank. And when I started doing this, I had looked at successful systems that had already existed out there, especially in the reefing hobby. Zeobac is it's the primary component of the Zeovit system. Without Zeobac, you're just throwing in rocks and adding trace elements into your tank, right? And looking at the results and growth from, the most successful Zeovit users, you can see that their rate of growth in general outcompetes pretty much other traditional reef keeping hobbies or reef keeping methods. In terms of coloration, that might not be what you want, and that's what I aim to uh, solve in my iteration of the product. But with the Zeovit philosophy, it was keeping an ultra low nutrient system and adding these bacteria that the coral could feed on, and maximizing the filtration and then adding in the required nutrients and trace elements. That kept a super pale pastel look in their acropora, which nowadays is not trend, it's not hip. You don't want like bleachy acros, and you want that really deep, vibrant color. And what I had hypothesized at that time was that, in order to get that really rich protein tissue fluorescence, you obviously need to be consuming a lot of food and protein. So that's where the particulate food is really emphasized in my iteration. Whereas Zeovit, if you look at their product line, in terms of food, they have like one, and it's this tiny vial. It's called like Coral Vitalizer, and you add like 5 drops for an entire SPS tank. That's like 150 gallons, and there's no way 5 drops of whatever this is going to feed thousands and thousands of polyps. So that's where I wanted to use these established concepts that were already readily available to hobbyists and see if it was really snake oil or not. Perhaps it was user error. And, after doing this for so many times, I really think why so many people had qualms and complaints with these, probiotic systems was user error, and that they didn't really understand how much more that they had to feed once they got onto these methods. Because, like how I had said earlier about the acceleration and the gas pedal, once you really go into hyperdrive, you can't back off the gas. You got to keep on going, and if anything, you got to add more.
It's like
So
Ozempic.
yeah.
So yeah, I completely agree that bacteria as a micron size, as a food source, is the basis of coral's heterotrophic feeding. That's what all the literature says. I guess my question is why these particular strains, which are terrestrial strains. So, for instance, Top Shelf, they've got Taras that are growing, Rhodomonas, and they feed that to all of their systems. And I talked to Taras at Reef Stock, and everyone that I know that uses Rhodo as a food source, or even uses like some of the hydrospace stuff as well, these coral associated saltwater strains, you're going to have the same feeding response. So, in my mind, A, do we know what impact this is having on the microbiome over time? If we're adding a massive amount of Bacillus subtilis to keep up with coral's nutritional needs, obviously there's going to be residual in the water column, which could consume some nutrients in the system, trace elements, whatever, which could change the microbial population in the tank over time to maybe one pathogenic. We don't know because we haven't seen the data. So why would we not go for an approach where we know what we're adding? It's coral associated strains. There's literature to support it, and you could get the same feeding response as long as you're culturing it. I mean, the one argument you had was that people don't have access to lab level sterilization. Well, I mean, pretty much everyone can culture phytoplankton, and this stuff is just as simple, I would say, culturing rhodo. It's the same thing. Pop it in the microwave, you add F2, you add the culture, and you get air. It's a very similar process. So I guess why
Right.
these strains?
There's not an exact advocate for these strains exactly. Though I think what you're trying to get at is the overall concept, right? This is a core pillar, right? Adding a certain bacteria strain is a pillar, not exactly these strains. So I think you're misunderstanding me here. This is the particular ones that I have are just exactly. It's the ones that I had prior, right? Like I said before, I'm just using everything up, and in later iterations, if other products have a optimal response, I'm obviously going to switch. You know what I mean? I'm
That
not
makes
going to
sense.
continue using this. Yeah, it's just this is a novel concept, right? So we go through iterations, we see what works, and at the moment it seems to work, right? I've been doing this for at least a year. Other peoples have been doing this for at least several months consistently, reporting all the same things. At this point, it's still anecdotes. I get it. It's not concrete data. We haven't done any analysis to it. But the immediate short-term response that we've gotten, especially among all the testers that I have reporting back to me, is that if done correctly, I'm happy, right? And so this is, I think, a great first step going into this direction. Later, obviously there's going to be refinements. We're going to optimize the formula. We're going to pick the right bacteria to grow. We're going to use the right medium to grow these bacteria in. But this is a kind of a stepping stone to get more hobbyists thinking in this direction versus, hey, I'm having issues. I'm going to throw chemically in my tank, or hey, my corals don't look right. I'm just going to dump all this food in my tank and hope they eat it, right? Because fundamentally, sure, that is going to solve a problem, but there's an issue to what extent, right? What extent is feeding too much pollution, right? What extent is changing your water, a drastic change to the environment, right? You're helping and hurting at the same time with these. And through the dosing of probiotic bacteria, it's kind of like adding a net neutral change, right? You are adding in the immediate particulates that the corals need to eat, and any excess is consumed by the bacteria, and then in turn the coral eat that bacteria as well. So you have a more holistic approach, whereas um, feeding one thing or adding a specific trace might address it, but at what point, right?
Sure. So, I mean, like I say, I definitely support the train of thought. I mean, it's very much in line with what I've been researching and trying to push on reef builders for a very long time now is a holistic approach, looking at things from peer-reviewed data to apply it. I guess, and I also respect that, it's you're able to reflect and go through changes to make it better. So I guess if we're looking at making it better, in my mind, I suppose we need to examine, the term probiotic, right? So, I mean, some of the things you talked about in your video, you talked about, having something that can provide nutrition, but also does not have any biofouling, right? So, in my mind, and I've used Bacillus subtilis too. I've cultured that, and I've tried to feed NPS with it, and I have seen success. But I mean, something you just said is, we don't see any immediate drawbacks to this, and sure, we don't. But I think that over time, potentially adding in terrestrial strains could have an impact on the microbiome we're not aware of. So what I would be interested in seeing is a transition from, terrestrial strains that are in all these products out there, whether it be lactobacillus or bacillus subtilis, to trying to have selective culture of saltwater strains. And there's some that are out there on the market. And like I said, you can get pure cultures of Rhodomonas. And I think that maybe trying to refine this approach to where we eliminate that as an unknown and we have a known input, right? So I agree carbon source. I agree a particulate food. I agree that we need a bacterial source to bake up that trophic level that's being missed. But the issue I have with it right now is because we're adding in the unknown, which, like Zeovit, whoever is not going to tell us what bacterial strains are in that product. And that's an issue. So
Yeah, I
and who
totally
knows
agree.
what it could have over time. And also because, well, I appreciate they're trying to be sterile in a lot of ways. I think that it could be even more controlled. So having a monoculture of one choice strain of a bacterial strain that's the same micron size that has the same protein, I think could be where this could go.
Right. I think at a further like industrial and optimized scale, we could obviously do that and really hidden on these specific niches and optimize the final product. But there's also, evidence like co-culturing different bacterial strains leads to different end results, right? The byproducts of these bacteria change depending on what environment they exist in. And, you know, maybe, like I said, this is the first iteration of this, and maybe I'm looking at it at different at the wrong lens, perhaps. Maybe it's not exactly the bacteria that is causing this benefit, but perhaps the fermentation of the ingredients, right? And the accessibility of the food that we use, right? And the bacteria and the enzymes really just enhance that in that case, right? That's why a lot of people perhaps don't even dose bacteria or don't even feed as heavily can say anecdotally that their systems are doing great and I don't have to do this and I can just let my fish do all the work for me, right?
I'm curious to know if you've done any aquabiomics testing pre and post the dosing of your concoction. I think it's interesting from that perspective, but also that you were gone for a month and did not do this, and there was definitely anecdotal evidence that it was benefiting from this concoction. But have you done any like hard data or any water testing to back any of this up?
So I did not do any prior to me going into this. That's mostly due to me being at school at that time. So I was just kind of brainstorming and just kind of coming up with ideas that I could implement once I got home right away. And I didn't, obviously have that forethought because this was just something that I pulled up my ass. But from there, once it started really working, or I started really noticing results, I thought about it, and at this point, I've ordered my test kits. So I will be doing it soon to see what the tank looks like and what the culture looks like, and I can probably see if what I'm doing is leading to any like direct issues in my system if something's like super out of whack, or if not, I'll just keep on doing with it. And as the science keeps on evolving and as I talk to more people and more research is done on this topic, I think this could be where, the hobby ultimately ends up, because a lot of this like fundamental research is used through like feed optimization, right? In industrial agriculture. People aren't, researching, oh, how do I keep Acropora tenuis alive, right? It's how do I grow a bazillion salmon in a week? That's how they're using this. So if we, start digging in this realm and looking at how we can do this in our reef tanks, that's where, the magic sauce is going to be, because all the literature that I found directly using biofloc aquaculture is used in a different format and used for industrial aquaculture of shrimp and tilapia, like filter feeding fish that can eat these flocks of bacteria from the water column. And it kind of analogous to the corals in this case that catch these large masses or bacterial plankton, which in essence, that's what these bioflocks are, right? They're just clumps of bacteria plankton. So if you can replicate that in your reef tank, my idea, my train of thought is that if I can do this and if this works, this is, obviously what I should be doing if it's cheaper and if I get more output out of it. It just makes sense.
Sure, sure. And I say, I think you do have a lot of good anecdotal results. I think, like I say, when I've started feeding bacterial products like the hydrospace stuff, and I culture, bacterial plankton, I saw immediate benefits very similar. I don't do acros. I need to do acros,
Hmm.
but I
Oh,
mean, I saw benefits with everything else for sure in very similar ways. There was a very pronounced feeding response, and growth really took off. So,
hmm
like I say, I like the train of thought. My only gripes with it are just that one, we
you're
don't
right.
know
Optimizing the
what if.
strain.
Yeah, I think optimizing the strain is one. I think that there obviously are always going to be concerns with contamination, and I think that yeah, having more control over that, because even adding in the particulate foods, you never know. So like an example I gave is like Telegram sent in an aquabiomics report of some ecobalance he had laying around. And I know you don't advocate for using ecobalance, but obviously these bottled bacteria are packed with different nutrients to where the strains can exist for a long period of time. And he found several coral pathogens that had just happened to grow in there through a drop of water or whatever. So my concern is if someone is using this more economical approach, I'm going to use what I have around. Who knows what's existed in this 2-year-old
Right.
bottle of bacteria you could be growing up.
Right.
So I,
Right.
I
There's
think
yeah.
that those are the failure points right now is we don't know what strains we're adding and what impact that can have on the coral or the tank's microbiome. And also there could be, room for contamination just because of the imperfection of how these products are packaged. So, but I
Right.
think that the approach is great, and it would just need to be, yeah. And with cold cultures, that's a whole other beast because typically when you have synergistic species work together, yeah, they'll have different gene expression that could change how the metabolites are produced. But to quantify that, that's like gas
Yeah. It's
chromatography. That's a whole other
like
beast.
exactly like the science or the technologies out there is not geared towards, or it's not just not looking towards us as a hobby. So I mean, what I had to go off is relatively loosely published papers and just years of experience, right? And otherwise, I probably wouldn't have done this if I hadn't known that Zeovit has been producing great like coral systems for over 20, 30 years, right? There's obviously something to it that works. And that's the only reason I would use something like that. Most of the products that I used are, I guess, like used by thousands of people and have had, an overwhelming amount of success with them. I wouldn't just say like, hey, pick up some dirt from your backyard. It's got good bacteria in it
Yeah,
and grow it out.
yeah,
It's not a good idea in the first place. But I think with the current iteration, let's say, given the assumptions that all the bacteria that I currently use are beneficial to the corals, it's an issue of prolonged culturing, sterilization, or perhaps preservation, right? And I already think that, the technology or the fundamental concepts of refinement already exist out there. We just haven't applied it yet, right? Obviously keeping this large volume of liquid culturing could release things into the air or potentially contamination could come in. But if we look at other preservation techniques that humans have used for millennia, we could perhaps find something that's much more rudimentary and cost efficient.
So here's my pitch to you. I'm going to send you some Rhodomonas as a culture, and I'm going to try your method. And if you've got a tank that you're not doing the concoction in, let's compare. Let's see if maybe Rhodomonas could be utilized as a very easy commensal strain that could be grown up that is coral associated. I will pick up the things that are needed to make the concoction. I'll do aquabiomics before and after. I'll try it in one of my little nanos, and then I'll continue to dose Rhodomonas on my main system. Let's say I'll take frags of some of the stuff I have in my main system, put it in the 10 gallons so I can at least have control of the coral types. Let's set up a little experiment. Let's see what happens. Terrestrial versus saltwater strain.
That'd be awesome. I'm totally down. I actually kind of have a little surprise. It's something that I've been working on for a while now. It's pretty much the concoction right here, but in a extremely concentrated, in I think more shelf stable form. So essentially, that entire jug that I had going on is pretty much in here, this little mason jar now, alongside a bunch of marine seafood. So everything in here was a whole ingredient at one point. And as you can kind of see, it's all goop. And I've been feeding this into my tank daily, roughly at 1 gram per 100 gallons.
Looks like matcha.
And oh, I mean, it's
It's a relish,
it's
man.
yogurt.
Yeah. Coral kombucha.
But yeah, it's got all the characteristics of a live culture. There's gas formation, there's decomposition of the products, and I think it's just like an active fermentation process that we could potentially start, using like homegrown or, products for our own tanks. I mean, I think it's about time that, we hop off, store bought or at least these pre-made items that we don't have direct control over. And what I did was I directly went to my seafood market. I chose all the right things. I sourced all the fresh raw seafood, still with its guts, all the enzymes intact, uh, applied some preservation techniques, and it's been going on for about 2 weeks or a week now. And the change in the composition of the ingredients has been pretty gnarly. And just for the dosage, like 1 gram per 100 gallons, that's nothing. And pretty much this mason jar is a year's supply for my tank.
Gosh, that's,
So
There you go.
it's got to smell awful.
it doesn't.
Oh,
It
okay.
doesn't smell.
Really?
Like I can. It's in my room. It doesn't smell. It's it's pretty nuts. And all the things like I put in fresh raw seafood in here, and it doesn't smell. So obviously something is taking place, and the corals seem to really benefit from it. So I think there's obviously more research and optimization that can be done to this, but like I said, these are all just stepping stones for some final end goal or utopia that we all want to reach.
Yeah,
I'll toy around with it in the lab. I've got some things I can mess around with. I've got some
If you want,
ideas already.
I could probably send you like a little scoop.
Make me a little scoop.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just send you it in a little baggie, overnight it or something, and we'll see what exists in here. Probably
Not
do some
shady
tests
at all.
on this.
We're trading goop, Remy. I'm sending him bacteria. He's sending me bacteria.
I'll
If it
let
works, it
Salem.
works, right?
I'll let Salem try your goop before I try your goop.
A lot of people are gonna want this goop, man. If it works, if it does what I say I think it does, it's a lot of people are gonna want this goop.
Like I say, my only concern is just making the goop in a controlled way so there's no coral
Exactly.
pathogen, and also analyzing if mass addition of these terrestrial strains can impact the microbiome, because there's been plenty of instances such as the Keys where there's been human waste runoff, things like that, to where terrestrial strains can begin to infect coral and become opportunistic. So like I say, I'm not saying that adding Bacillus subtilis lactobacillus will kill coral over time, but who knows what we could be growing. So I would like to see a much more controlled and refined way to do this. I think
Right.
the premise is good, but I think that there needs to be a controlled way to do it to eliminate those unknowns. And I think
Right.
if we can do that, that's a good way forward.
Mm-hmm. And like I said, just going off of what I had read and the visual examples that I saw while I was in Vietnam, I was able to kind of like tour these large shrimp aquaculturing facilities and pretty much just kind of observe how they treat their livestock and what they do and how they put in the probiotics. And I pretty much took at least the same basic steps that they took, you know what I mean? And if they're adding, these land strains for these like brackish water or marine species, I just kind of took on the logical next extension of that. And let's say if there's a thriving coral reef right off this, aquaculture facility, I mean, this is my guess that I don't think it's going to have much impact long term. But like you said, there could be potential that there are other dynamics that we don't understand yet in the closed environment.
Yeah,
Like
so I
obviously,
mean, those
yeah,
are
if we
the
had the entire data set, we could model everything. We could see the dynamics of things over time and make inferences off of that. But just given how little data exists for marine ecosystems, or in our case, reef ecosystems that are in our houses, we really can't do that at a small scale. And I think what you guys are doing with this like kind of community approach is a really logical next step where we can kind of crowdsource a lot of information and see what's actually going on, and where if my little situation is a fluke or there could just be a boom and bust cycle that we can't account for properly, or whatever this trend might be, just getting more data overall so that we can provide a proper analysis is obviously going to be the next step.
Yeah, so one more thing I will say about the applicability of the whole like the biofloc angle is obviously while shrimp, tilapia are complex eukaryotic organisms that can exist without their microbiome, coral are
Right.
rudimentary organisms that are wholly dependent on the holobiont, right? They have to
Yeah.
live with these associations, and any type of dysbiosis that occurs in that environment that might contain ecosystem is what causes a pathogenic event. So my concern
Exactly.
is introducing external bacteria that are not endemic to the coral's microbiome over time could cause some issues. So even if the coral eating them does not cause a problem, if there's a high enough concentration of them that it still exists in a closed environment, them and just localized nutrient changes, things like that, they could eventually outcompete some of the commensal strains that are associated with coral, which then, as a domino effect, could cause a dysbiotic event. So that's my concern. I don't think that, like as you said, like the runoff from the actual shrimp farm to the reef, there's enough heterotrophic organisms, there's enough water volume, that's not an issue. But in a closed loop system where we add
Right.
thousands of
Yeah.
colony forming units a day over time, and then you might have the chance of getting one wrong strain in there. That seems like a risk that, as of now, I'm not willing to take. I'll toy with it anyways, but
I
you
mean,
know,
yeah, I mean, that's very logical. And obviously, like, it takes a lot of balls to mess around with this stuff because it could be one wrong step and you wake up the next day and your entire tank's white, right? And I definitely wouldn't be doing this as long as I have if I didn't notice the benefits, right? And like I said, like you said, I could be on like a razor's edge right now. I could just be on the cusp of this dysbiosis, and I just wouldn't know it, and I could just never tell, just due to me being a human and not having the proper tech to analyze these things. But if it works, if the theory or the concept works, and then further optimization happens, I this would be great. And if there is no or if there is a low chance of dysbiotic event, even better, right? That just means we have more access to the things that are going to be proven are beneficial. And if you know we can do this at a even cheaper, more sustainable cost, that's even better with the looks of how the planet and the reefs are going.
Yeah. I would say to land the plane here, I think I represent probably 60 to 70% of the hobbyists out there. You guys are more in like that top 5% of tinkerers, I mean, obviously you have scientific backgrounds, So if I'm interested in making this probiotic concoction, is this something that the average reefing hobbyist should be attempting in their own home?
R- Well, I guess in order to explain that, let's say if you are already using any of these products or these products in conjunction already, the concoction is essentially your fish tank, right? It's just we're just doing this externally, right? And then maximizing whatever culture that we put in to get more out of it. If we were to put all this stuff in willy-nilly into our tank, it's going to happen to a certain extent anyway, right? So in terms of safety and in terms of replicating it at home, I think it's possible. But it's just at what extreme of the formula or the technique is that is being applied. So you can go out right now, and I'm sure most reefers already have the products to do so, like some starter, like cycling bacteria. They obviously have like fish food, and enzymes might be hard to source, but I mean, all enzymes are basically the same. Proteases are what's mostly used in these things to break down the sludge, the cellulase. So you could probably find some at like the health store, and you could pretty much just start expediting these biological processes that happen in your tank already. What we're just doing is that we're just adding a huge influx at once, and I'm just seeing a good result from that. I'm not advocating that everyone should do this huge influx or surge method. It all depends on the state and the readiness of their tank, right? I'm only able to do this because I have a very dense bioload, right? I have at least like 100 different acroporas in a 160-gallon tank. So if you think about 100 different individuals that need all roughly similar things, you're going to have to find a way to introduce it in mass all at once and not have extreme excess, right? And how do you solve that issue at a large scale? And that's, the, impetus or the kind of why I made this. It was to fix my specific problem, not everyone's specific problem, just my specific problem. And if you have problems that are similar to me, I would recommend you to take a look. But if you are not me and if you don't have the same tank that I do, you're obviously going to have to refine it to fit your needs, right? It's not a band-aid, and that's what I said earlier. I don't want people to go out there looking for band-aids for their boo-boos. They gotta figure out how to not to get another boo-boo.
And I will say that, Salem, I think this means that you need a ton more Acropora in your system. So
I'm on it. I'm getting it. Meckley's sending me a box. I'm on it. I'm loving
Oh,
them
sweet.
already. I got one Walt Disney. I've always been like, I don't have the money to buy acros. It's a bad return on investment if I kill them. I'm gonna invest in everything else I can grow really well. So I've
What do you grow, Salem?
like a shit ton of zoas, like really high end
Oh,
zoas, like and
yeah.
then LPS, everything but acros I grow, and then
You
I
don't have
just
you don't have random melting issues with your zoas?
no,
No?
no.
That's that's good. I mean, I used
There's
to be
some
really
tricks.
crazy. Okay. I used to be really, really crazy into Zoas before I got into Acros. It's a kind of interesting transition
it's the
that a lot of
gateway drug.
reefers have. Yeah, the Zoas into Acros.
Yep.
Yeah,
We-
Chris Cap gave me one Walt Disney, and now I'm like, holy shit, this is awesome.
Oh yeah.
Like, all right, maybe 4 years ago I would have killed him. My system's ripping enough now. I've got Halide T5 combo. I could put like 500 par down if I need to. I think it's time I try them. So
What halides are you running, or what bulb?
I've got some 15K ones off of eBay because the spectrum's the same, and I couldn't find
Okay.
anything else. They're like some shop light ones. So the spectrum had like two peaks different, and then I just supplemented those peaks with T5s. So it's 200. They're only
Yeah,
250-watt double ended, but it's like an 18-inch deep tank, so they're
more than
fine.
enough. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah. Always something that about halide, like there's just something with Acros specifically that you really can't replicate. There's like a metallic sheen that Acros develop, and I could really spot it when I go to vendors or frag swaps, and it's all lit with LEDs most of the time at frag swaps, but it's very noticeable to me at least when a vendor has grown out their acro under T5s or halide and is displaying over LED, because there's a distinct, very noticeable difference just in like the morphology of the coral. Either like thicker tissue, more vibrance, it's the tissue health is completely different. So there's some other secret sauce to lighting that I guess is another rabbit hole that we could dig into.
Spectrum. I've
Oh
yeah,
yeah,
that's
100%.
I'll probably have an article here. I've done so much reading. I've got some crazy thoughts about UV, but that's probably for another time.
It, what I also think it might just be an issue of delivering the light to the coral, right? And the proper like blanketing of the light, whereas LEDs are very, directional. Halides have this very soft light, even though it's a point source with the reflectors. And I always kind of wish that there was an LED design that kind of had like a dome or like a curved shape. That way you could really hit more of the coral from more extreme angles. And that's why a lot of people will also notice that, mounting actors horizontally will lead to more growth. But in terms of growth that people want, it's probably not that what they want, because when you mount them horizontally, they're going to encrust, right? They're not going to shoot branches. They're just going to encrust and build a huge base. And a lot of people want to snip their frag right away, and so they choose to mount them vertically. But if you really want a healthy colony, I recommend everyone just to break it, stick it sideways, it'll encrust, let it do its thing, and then you'll have a really healthy colony by the end of year one.
We've got a fun little project at the studio that Jack's working on. We've got an acrylic tank, and the stand is open on the bottom. So we're gonna mount LEDs underneath, coming up
Oh,
from the sand bed, and have no sand bed, and then have
Yeah.
some on the sides, so like 360-degree LEDs, and see what
that's
we could do.
interesting.
That was a
I mean,
project that Jake had started before he passed. And those, I don't know if you noticed that, Salem, but those lights are already mounted underneath there. They're
Oh, I
already
didn't
there.
see that. I just
Yeah.
heard people talking about it. I didn't
Yeah.
see they were
There's
there. That's
like
awesome.
just envision like a closed loop system where in the stand you would see the hole in the stand. Well, instead of like, PVC coming up through there are LED pucks, which is like the coolest thing. I think the original idea, if I'm not mistaken, was that Jake wanted to plant an upside down reef. He wanted everything to grow the other way.
That's awesome.
Um, in my mind, I thought it'd be cool to have like some sort of cave structure or something that you could light from a weird angle. But with all of the farmers that are doing these weird things by putting lights underneath the glass on the bottom glass so that they can get some weird mushroom morphs and that kind of thing, I don't know. I think it's a fun experiment. That's why I'm so happy about this conversation tonight, because I think walking in, there was a lot of opposing views, and I think we've come to some sort of conclusion here, at least a continuation of where we can go from here. And Alan, I think you have a lot of great self-awareness here, which is fantastic, because I think there's a lot of people out there in this hobby that are just throwing stuff at the wall to see if it'll stick. And it sounds like you've done a lot of great research on this. I think with a few, fine tuning things which you've already said that you are working on, this could become something that's really cool. So
Yeah, and I mean, that's always been kind of my dream, kind of growing up as a kid. My parents were always like, worry about other things other than like your reef tank, because I would come home from school and just kind of fixate on this. And like I would spend my entire like afternoons looking at a specific fish that I wanted, or saving up for it, or doing something like that. And it's been really awesome to kind of, go through my entire life so far as a kid, getting into Princeton and then writing my thesis on the hobby as well. And then getting out of school and then starting research on this end. It's also been like, it's been a great like self-fulfilling cycle that I feel like I've been really blessed to be in this opportunity. And if we can finally find something that has other you know uses as well, that's great. Hopefully soon I will be talking with a few other researchers, and we'll see if this can get help like coral spawning and get that you know off and kicking, because I've had several different, unique species spawn in my own home aquarium. And if I can, supplement with the feed that I've developed, and get my lighting schedule correctly, it'd be awesome to grow like, homegrown Trachyphilia, Acanthophilia, which I've had spawn on just random occurrences. And it's just like, if I know I can, if it's happened once, I know I can do it again, right?
Do you
It's
cry
just,
when that happens? Because I feel like I would see a coral spawn and I would just weep.
I, this, I was the first time the Acantho spawned, I was just too shocked. I was like, my dad's like, go get your phone. But I'm like, where's my phone? I ran around the entire house looking for it. And by the time I found it, everything had like drifted away. And I was like, man, am I ever going to see this happen again? And I've just like been hoping for that second chance. And if I can do it again, I'd be so happy. And especially with just like the rarity of some of these specimens, you just don't see some of these like one in a million corals that come in like once every decade. I've had like a trachea or a Welsophilia now that I've had for almost a decade, and it's probably I've never seen. It's like a rainbow splatter painting. You pick the most vibrant neon colors and just whip the paintbrush at the wall, and you turn that into a brain coral. That's what it would look like, and it's so beautiful. And every day I hope that if I can get like a genetical, clone, or if I can get like an offspring of this, it'd be so amazing to pass this on to someone that I really care about, or preserve the hobby somehow. And I think that's what my ultimate end goal is. It's the hobby, and I guess like the money making aspect is nice sometimes, but it's more about the overarching picture and preserving the world's natural resources here.
Yeah.
Well, Alan, I would say that we are in very much agreement on that. That's thing is we seem to be very like minded in our goals, and we're the young guys in this. There's a couple other people, but this is the future of the industry, and
Oh yeah,
I
yeah,
think I think it'd be great to work on this and to help develop it with you for sure. So
sweet man. I
I'm
mean, I'll
excited to try it
definitely.
out, get some data behind it. I'll tinker with it in the
Hmm.
lab, so it'd be
Yeah, I
cool.
think we offer a unique perspective in that with Reef Builders, this can be all documented. We can have articles, we can have videos surrounding this. We can make sure that everything is published and well documented. Salem's awesome at that. So, and obviously from a video perspective, if you'd be willing, we could always come over and tour and do all that kind of stuff. I think that would be awesome. You had brought up something with like coral spawning, and I'm reading right now the complete illustrated breeder's guide to marine fishes.
Hmm.
And it's so interesting, as I think they mentioned this on the Oscars too. Like, we're only in the first century of filmmaking, and to be there when Michelangelo and these guys were,
Oh,
painting and things like that. And in this book, in the Marine Breeders book, you know, the first goldfish started being crossbred around like 1500 or something like that. Just think, and we're in the first 50 years, 60 years of
exactly.
saltwater. Like,
Hmm.
we are
There's so
in,
much to learn.
yeah, we are the
So
very
much.
beginning stages right now. And so like I get goosebumps just like Meckley does whenever this kind of stuff is being talked about. I may not have gone to school for bio or for microbiology or marine science or any of that, but this is just so intriguing, and I love being a fly on the wall when smarter people are in the room and I get to just listen. So this is a great conversation tonight. Awesome.
No, and I think it's the job or the goal of every hobbyist that is maintaining a reef tank to go out there and try and learn something new and try and apply it to your own tank every day. Because I mean, a lot of these inventions or you know innovations are just accidents, right? Some guy gets a crazy idea, pulls it out of his behind or whatever, and then it works. Maybe it sticks on the wall, and then you look back at it, look at why it's stuck, and try and see if the reason why it's stuck in the first place is something that you can pursue. And then that's how all these innovations in medicine and science, that's how it works. It's all through, lucky coincidence most of the time. And a lot of times we're just too, stuck in the books and never looking up and looking at the real world where we are, just hyper focused and hyper fixated on one thing where, it's nice to come in with like a fresh view and kind of, shotgun approach everything because in terms of probability, that's the only way you're gonna get something to stick, right? If you shotgun it, especially when you come from a position of like little fundamental understanding of like microbiology or the chemistry, the best way you can do something like at home too with like cooking is, come up with something, look in your fridge, pull something out. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, next time it's going to be better, right? And that's the mentality that I really want to bake into everyone, is that don't be worried about your setbacks, and that if you can stick through it through the hardest times, you're only going to come back better. And then at the end of it, you're going to be more proud of who you are at the end of the day. Like, I mean, especially when I was in high school and losing everything that I had worked for growing up in high school, it was a kind of like pivotal moment for me. It was over 16, or yeah, at least 12 years of collecting fish, corals, all sorts of stuff. I had a I had a Hawaiian endemic tank set up, so it was only fish from Hawaii. I had about 25 flame wrasses in there, and to see that wiped out, I was, I cried for weeks, but I got over it. And coming back, if I hadn't had stayed in the hobby, I don't know if I would have gone to, school where I did, or where I would be today. And these hardships, and you learn from them. And I think the hobby is a great source of eustress, like the beneficial stress that we get stronger and we build on from. And it's also a great source of actual stress too.
Well,
Man, that's how I feel too.
it's
That's
bulking
it.
season for Salem, so
Oh, you're on the bulk now?
I'm on the
I'm on the
bulk
cut.
now. I'm on the bulk. Long way to go, but I'm starting.
Eat ice cream. Ice cream, just ice cream.
Yeah, I've got a fast metabolism. I can dirty bulk. I got to get the calories in. So
No, I mean that's what I used to do. Ice cream, mass gainer.
yeah,
That's it.
mass gainer I might need to try.
It's gonna do horrendous things to your gut microbiome.
I know. I drank so much. I posted some Red Bull before Reef Stock, and I got just like completely reprimanded. They're like, "Oh, okay, yeah, you're speaking for the coral microbiome, but you're destroying your own." Okay, hypocrite. And I was like, they got me there.
Well, if there's nothing else that we want to talk about tonight, I definitely want to have you back on again, Allan. If for nothing else than just to discuss some results that maybe you and Salem have had, swapping ideas. If there's nothing else, we can go ahead and wrap up. You guys good with that?
Let's get some data. Let's optimize it. Let's come back in like however long it takes for Aquabiomics results.
Oh yeah, heck yeah. I'm looking forward to it. If this is the future, I'm glad to be right here where I am.
Very cool. Very cool. Well,
Absolutely.
Allan, thank you so much for joining us on this session of Reef Therapy powered by ICP Analysis. Next episode will be 100, and it is a very special episode that we shot in the Reef Builder studio with all of the people that Jake Adams loved and adored. It was really cool to be with them all in the studio at the same time. So very special episode coming up next. Allan, thank you so much for being with us, and we will see you in the next one. Bye, guys.
Thanks for having me.